Welcome to Inspire Change, a new inspirational and motivational broadcast that strives to empower, educate, and inspire men in a positive way. Please join me in welcoming Gunter, international psychologist, author, speaker, and producer.
Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Inspire Change. Let me ask you a question. So, what's in a slap? Well, that depends. The incident that I'm referring to, and all of you out there listening to my podcast must be aware of what happened between Will Smith and Chris Rock. That is, Will Smith slapped Chris Rock at the Oscars. Now, there's been various reactions from shock to distress to incredulity, all sorts of stuff, okay? So in this instance, I've been asked to actually focus my attention for the podcast on this extraordinary event that happened at the Oscars. And so I've got a few thoughts about this. Everybody's had an opinion in some form or another. Now, in this particular podcast, I'm not going to focus on Chris Rock's joke, okay? I want to focus on Will Smith for lots of reasons. Partly because I have long admired Will Smith's work as an actor. And for some reason or another, I had this idea about him as being a relatively enlightened man, or at least someone striving to be better than, many of his peers or many of the population. So when Miranda got in touch with me had I seen the slap, I'd actually come back from a holiday down the south coast with the family, with my wife, and I hadn't. And so, I quickly pulled it up, and I must say my first reaction too was like I was shocked. There was also a little bit about, is this a put on? And so when I went deeper into the situation and I started pulling up, broader videos of what actually happened, I very quickly came to the conclusion that, no, this isn't staged. This was very much for real. And then listening to Will Smith's apology. So I also got a sense of, this is really sad. There's a lot of reasons why I felt sad about it. Not just because he sort of blew my bubble about what I thought he was about, but simply about the whole situation reinforcing what I've been talking about in Making Good Men Great. That is, we still haven't come out of our tendency to be combative. But more about that later, because what I want to do is I want to offer a little bit of a sort of psychological deconstruction of this, okay, and especially about where I think Will Smith is at. Now, I want everybody to be very clear, and I hear lots of psychologists always saying that, and I think it is important. I am not diagnosing Will Smith. I'm drawing certain conclusions from what I saw and the background information that I've gathered in trying to understand this situation. How is it that someone like Will Smith can do something so public that fundamentally is so bad, right? And it's not like he's a bad person. That's not what I'm saying at all. In fact, this is a classic scenario where we need to ask ourselves the question, why do good people do bad things? So in that context, I'm going to come back to Philip Zimbardo's model. And that is, I want to look at, dispositional aspects to Will Smith, i.e. what's going on for this man internally. I want to also bring into play the situation that Will Smith has found himself in. And I want to look at the systemic issues behind this. In other words, cultural attitudes, gender, values that are abundant in our society about these issues, about, masculinity, relationships, and so on. Okay, so let me come back a little bit to the point where I can go, okay, this is the information that I've gathered from which I can make some educated guesses. Okay, remember again, I am not diagnosing Will Smith other than to say this is what's presented itself and this is one way of understanding it. Now, going back some years, one of the things that I discovered was that Jada Pink Smith and Will Smith had what I would refer to as a high stress relationship. And this is also by their own admission. I mean, Will Smith described, his marriage to Jada Pinkett Smith as probably the most challenging experience that he's had in his whole life. Now, in my work with men who find themselves into in relationship difficulties often, one aspect of it is a lot of guys do not necessarily understand the level of emotional maturity or the lack of emotional regulation that's going on for their partner. They also don't necessarily understand if there are any sort of potentially clinical issues going on. Okay, so we can talk about a whole range of things, but I don't want to get into those in this podcast, other than to say that Will and Jada had a tough relationship and she had an affair. Okay, so you got to ask yourself is what's going on in that relationship for one partner to essentially outsource either just sex or sex and emotional, issues to somebody else. Okay, now Will has come out saying that it wasn't an affair because he and Jada had an open relationship. Okay, so this was permissible. Now the first question that comes to me is that because she, in a sense, demanded that, or she wanted that in the relationship, and he went along with it in order not to lose her, or what was going on? Now, I'm not saying any of this is necessarily true. I'm just asking questions. When it's like a clinician, we need to go, okay, what's going on here? So, if I put myself into most men's shoes whose partners have had an affair, one of the key issues is obviously that you're going to feel hurt. Unless you are sort of bulletproof in that department, which most men, in my experience, are not, right? And so you got to ask the next question, well, what is it that he does with that pain, that hurt? Why would that emerge in the first place? Now, the obvious answer is that, well, if you've got any sort of sense of empathy, any sort of connection with your own emotional state, you are going to feel hurt, especially if it wasn't a affair, you weren't aware of it, suddenly it came out. And with it come all sorts of associated issues about rejection, abandonment, about am I good enough? So even someone with, Will Smith's accomplished record in the relationship, that stuff doesn't get any traction. What gets traction is, what is it that makes her love me and what is it that makes her go to somebody else? Now, in that context, we can't ignore the whole issue around masculinity and my sense of security. So the question that arises in that is, did Jada's affair create a deep-seated hurt and narcissistic wound wherein Will was questioning whether he was good enough as a man? Now, I don't know about enough, and I profess this about African American culture, and I can only talk about it from what I see in the media and some of my readings and so on. But this issue about masculinity, and especially hypermasculinity, in many respects, seems to be really relevant. Okay. The other aspect that we need to think about here is the degree of emotional maturity. How can I effectively and appropriately manage, an event like that, which is obviously stressful and hurtful and brings into play all my sense of ideas about me and what I'm about. And the other aspect is emotional regulation. Now, in that event where Chris Rock made a joke, neither Jada nor Will obviously appreciated the joke, and I won't get into whether that was appropriate or not, but they didn't. Now, at that point, Will took it upon himself to get up and walk onto the stage and slap Chris Rock. Now, he didn't do it, it wasn't like a light slap, it was a very serious slap. Definitely not changed. So, but why do this in front of a national TV or a global TV audience? So, one of the things that, I tend to think is that in this situation, we need to factor in that any award ceremonies are stressful. There is a lot of heightened emotion, plus there is an audience. So all these factors now come into play in Will's psyche. So if you look at Will from the perspective that take away the masculine mask and you look at the vulnerable human being that has been hurt, who fears the loss of his partner, is going to get defensive. So in that context, one, he's not dealing with stress very well, and this is, especially relevant when we talk about acquired narcissism that is especially prevalent amongst highly successful people. So he's going to get heightened even more at that point. And so the next bit is I need to make a statement. And that statement is I need to, protect, stand up, have my wife's back. And a lot of comments that I read, in various media aspects is this thing about, the man, standing up for the woman. We need to protect them. Well, I bet if you ask most women about that thing, is they go, I don't need my husband or my partner to talk on my behalf. All right, now that's different if some male is physically threatening my wife. Like, I'm going to take it from my perspective. I am going to stand up. Now, I'm not necessarily going to resort to physical violence at that point either. Right? But I am going to have her back, and I'm going to come between him and my partner. So if he gets physical, he can do that with me, but he's not going to do it to my partner. And I would do that for a friend as well, male or female. So it then comes down to the point, okay, so we look at the disposition of Will Smith in the context of the Oscars. We know it's a heightened, tense, stressful situation for Will. And a lot of that comes out when you read in between the lines of his apology. But the one thing that's clearly missing in that apology is him simply going, I was wrong. He has all sorts of excuses for why he did what he did, ranging from God to the devil to emotions. And the one that particularly rubbed me the wrong way was that love makes you do crazy things. Now, in my world, that is an excuse that I've had from men who are domestically violent. Right, so I just went, whoa, back off, buddy. You now have the whole stick at the wrong end. You do not either understand yourself, you don't understand relationship dynamics, and you certainly have an extraordinarily immature and impulsive relationship with your own feelings. Love does not make you do crazy things. Now, here's one thing that you're not going to hear from me too often, but I'm going to give you a Bible quote, and which is out of Corinthians, and that is that love is kind, love is patient, da-da-da-da-da. Those things are absolutely fundamentally true. Do I protect when I love? Yes, in some ways I do, but I'm not going to, patronizingly take over from my female partner and do that irrespective of what her wishes are. She's an equal, she's an adult. I'm going to check in, honey, are you upset by this? What do you want to do about it? Okay, so we have this problem and this continued problem of this patriarchal, patronizing, an essentially misogynistic attitude that we often use to excuse our impulsive, inappropriate, bad behavior. There's no excuse for violence. One of the things that I was looking at was, it's interesting how this one slap almost virtually replaced the whole Russia-Ukraine war. And so I'm going, well, here we got the macro picture of two nations at each other, and one nation clearly being badly behaved. In fact, they're war criminals in my book. On a smaller, nation that is trying to maintain its independence, its freedoms, its integrity being encroached on by this bully, the bear. And, it's interesting how then we see this play out to some degree in a one-to-one situation. Now, if I look at the whole thing historically, in the old days, the slap would have been a challenge to a duel. So we would have had two guys going out, at each other with weapons, in the old days, swords, and then with guns, or whatever it is they had to hand at the time that was fashionable. And one person would walk away and the other one was either, seriously injured or dead. That is an extraordinarily primitive emotional reaction. So it's one of the reasons why I chose not to talk about Chris Rock's joke, because I don't think that thing is relevant, really. What's relevant is how this very accomplished, renowned actor dealt with his own feelings. It's not so much what he did to Chris Rock, it's what he did in his relationship with himself, which exposed him in a way that says, man, you need a lot of growing up to do. As I said before, my wife and I spent a weekend with my daughter and her husband and our two grandsons. And all grandkids, the kids get into a bit of a squabble. And what do we tell them, from the parents to the grandparents, is don't use your fists, use your words. And Will Smith was extraordinarily emotionally inarticulate at that point in time. Now, it's not all on Will's shoulders. It has a lot to do how we as men have been socialized. And, this emphasis on these insane patriarchal values, of proving yourself, of being competitive, being the alpha. All of that stuff's just real bullshit, basically. So that's where my sadness came from, because at that moment, my first reaction, once I put it all together, was, Will, get yourself a good therapist. And on that note, I'm going to finish. Until next time, I hope this explained what's in a slap.
Gunter Swoboda does individual and group coaching for men looking to grow. For more information on this and the global Making Good Men Great movement, check out goodmengreat.com. If you have a topic for the show or would like to be a guest on the air, please email miranda@nortainment.com. That's miranda@NOIRTAINMENT.com. Thank you, and always keep inspiring change.